Andrew Powell here today. He is one of our spotlight companies with Learn to Win. A little bit about them. They've won a Phase 2 SBIR with the Air Force, and now they're on a Phase 3. So I'd just like to offer the stage to you and thank you for coming today, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Jim. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Powell. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Learn to Win. Learn to Win is a dual-use education technology company. And we got our start, actually, in the Hacking for Defense program just a year and a half ago at Stanford University. We then had the privilege to work with NSIN, with AFWorks, NavalX, a bunch of the innovative organizations here to transition this student concept from a class into a viable solution. And I'm proud to say we're now in the hands of over 20,000 users. We have contracts with the Air Force, Navy, and Space Force, hoping to get a contract with the Army. So if anybody sees a use case for our technology, we'd love to talk. And I'm really honored to tell our story here today, thanks to NSIN, as one of the success stories of some of the innovation efforts that they are really stimulating. So to give a brief history lesson on where we came from, I think the next slide is a photo of us at our Hacking for Defense final presentation. So this was our whole DoD footprint about 2 years ago. You'll see myself, my co-founders here, and our problem sponsor from Hacking for Defense, the folks from the Training Support Squadron or the Air Combat Command. But if you fast forward 2 years later, our company looks really different. We've got 34 employees. We've raised venture capital from top venture firm, Norwest Venture Partners, and we're serving 3 distinct markets. And I want to tell you about those distinct markets as a story of dual-use innovation, but also describe the use case specifically with DoD. So we started in sports in the early days, and the problem we were solving there was that college and professional football teams needed a better, faster way to train their players on playbooks, game plans, scouting reports. The 3-ring binders and hours of game film of the days of old just weren't keeping pace with the modern game that's changing so quickly. Within the military, we've served a use case around last mile training, the distinct, unique, proprietary areas of learning that are essential for mission success. It's the last mile of training, we believe, similar to telecom, that's kind of the hardest to crack, but also the most valuable. And then we're also working with a variety of enterprises serving their learning needs. So you might think, okay, NFL sports teams, DoD clients, enterprises, what's the common thread here? And the areas we focus are really on places where learning matters for performance, where there's a lot of proprietary content that's specific to an organization that you can't really buy off the shelf. It's not going to be on Coursera. It's not going to be on YouTube. It's things that are unique and perhaps confidential to that organization. It's also places where traditional training approaches create bottlenecks and don't meet the demands. So in the coming slides, I'll talk you through how we actually have solved that problem. So within DoD specifically, here's how we like to think about the problem. Our observation is continuous learning is really critical for mission performance. But a lot of times, the formal training programs within the DoD end before the mission actually begins. What do I mean by that? Well, this slide, apologies for those in the back. This is pretty dense. It may be hard to see. But on the left part of the screen, I have a whole bunch of examples of types of learning and training that are common to every DoD rating, every job, every particular career field. These are things you need to learn before you can even start the job. It's things like, aviation structural mechanic A school, where you spend 9 weeks in Pensacola, Florida. But then on the right part of the screen, there's a bunch of examples of last mile learning, the mission-specific things that actually take that foundational knowledge and make you an expert in your field. And these are the things, interestingly, that we find really drive about 80% of performance. The people who have been an absolute expert in their career path, it's the last mile learning they've done throughout their career that really make the difference in their performance. The problem this creates, though, is a lot of times this lives in people's heads. It's not actually formally documented, or if it is, it might be kind of haphazardly documented. And it's usually not explicitly taught. And so this creates a real problem where it's not an efficient way to upskill the people within your organization to turn a totally new person into an expert. So Learn to Win has tried to solve this problem, and I'm excited to give you a couple examples of how we've done that. So diving in on last mile, I'll give you 2 quick case studies to hopefully make the concept come to life. One comes from our work in sports. I know we're in Texas. We've got a lot of football fans here. So I'll tell you how the Carolina Panthers have used our product. And then the other comes from one of our contracts with the Navy, specifically around aviation maintenance. So if you go back about 18 months, Matt Rule had just been hired as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers, and he had a big challenge ahead of him. He needed to compile an entirely new coaching staff that hadn't coached together with a set of players that hadn't learned their playbook or schemes or anything. Not only that, he's doing it during a pandemic, so they can't be in person together to run through plays or to draw up plays on a whiteboard. And so he started trying to cobble together an effective learning program. They put together a bunch of PowerPoints walking through all the different plays. They made playlists of game film to express some of the concepts that players needed to learn. But he didn't feel like it resonating enough with players. So they brought in Learn to Win to take a lot of that raw material and turn it into an active learning experience for every player. And the result were lessons that look kind of like this. You might see a video of a player with a multiple choice question saying, what's your responsibility as the wide receiver? What's the route concept? There may be a video question where you would say, hey, say that we call sting, pass 37, bust or nudge. What's the progression that you need to walk through as the quarterback? Or there could be an image where you have a bunch of football icons and you have to draw the route and the blocking scheme. And then the coach could grade how well a player did that. So we gave them this tool and our platform for building lessons like this that's really easy to use. And over the next month, they built over 2,000 lessons. They trained their position coaches, the quarterback's coach, the wide receivers coach, the special teams coordinator, built hundreds of lessons teaching every single concept that players needed to learn. And they sent these out to the players instead of those PowerPoints. And the players completed those lessons and they got feedback as they went through it. And the result was essentially a ton of data around what people actually knew and what they were missing. This gives unprecedented insight into the skills that the players actually had, not what the coaches hoped that they had. And one example I want to show, this shared with permission from the Panthers. In the week before they were playing the Arizona Cardinals last year, the wide receivers coach sent out a lesson about the game plan for that week. And they identified on question number 9 that you can see here, pretty much every single wide receiver missed that question. And if you're the coach and you see this, you think, we probably shouldn't run the play that's covered in question number 9. Clearly, we are not prepared to execute on this play. So you could either pull that out of the game plan, not run the play, or you could spend the practice on Friday making sure your team actually understood it. And it's those sorts of insights into what your people really know for critical information that Learn to Win brings that they really just hadn't had access to before in the days of 3-ring binders or PowerPoints. So we're now serving over 100 customers across a whole bunch of different sports. Hopefully some of you are fans of the teams that we see here, notably not yet Texas or A&M. So if anyone has connections there, we'd love to work with them. One brief one that I'll highlight here, Ole Miss has been a super user of the product. They've looked really good this year, number 12 in the country. They're playing Bama this weekend. So, we would never venture to take credit for our client success. However, our name is Learn to Win. So hopefully the learning leads to a win this weekend. All right, so how does that look in DoD? Well, we've got over 30 different live uses of Learn to Win across the department. I'll talk through one case study that I think illustrates how last mile training is really important for success for particular missions. And that comes from the Chief of Naval Aviation Technical Training, and specifically at Naval Air Station Lemoore. So the problem for them was they had mechanics who were trained in all the foundational knowledge in their schoolhouse environments at A school and C school. But then the specific nuances of how that foundational knowledge was applied at Lemoore on the FA-18 was different. And there were distinct problems that would come up at that location that either folks had forgotten from their foundational schoolhouse experience or were things that over 10 years of working on site, people had picked up expertise in that wasn't really built into the formal training program. So this is what kind of the traditional training looked like, slides like this. But then we built a new experience that was enabling the subject matter experts on site to then turn their expertise into effective learning content. And so what that looks like is essentially a set of modules that had images and videos they had pulled together from their own examples on site and turned it into these kind of structured learning experiences that the new folks could take and learn from. So we rolled this out to a group of junior maintainers, and we did a pre-test and a post-test comparing the Learn to Win learning approach to the legacy learning approach, and then did an assessment afterwards of what was the difference. And basically, those who had taken the traditional approach scored 61% out of 100 on correctly identifying corrosion issues. Those that took the Learn to Win approach scored 91% out of 100. So we're really proud of those results. And I think one of the key things that is distinct about this versus other technologies is we enabled the subject matter experts to build this content themselves. So if they noticed something they didn't quite get right, they didn't need to hire a contractor to go in there and change the CBT or something like that. They could make that change immediately and deliver improved version to their workforce. So fast forwarding to today, and it seems like we have a technical issue with the slides. Are they still coming through? 1 minute, okay. Sorry about that. We back?
Did they pop up for you?
They have not yet.
And one thing we can dive into is we can talk a little bit about what it looks like for these people to get civil contracts and stuff like that. If you'd like to start talking through that.
Sure, sure. While they work on the slides, I guess I'll transition a little bit to talking about kind of high level where we've gone and what the various innovation efforts have enabled for us. So we first identified this concept in the course, and then pretty soon after won a direct to phase 2 with AFWorks. We're then able to transition that direct to phase 2 SIBR into a phase 3 contract and are applicant for the TAC-FI program right now. We also were benefited from a Naval X SBIR that has enabled us to start working with the Navy.
One question I have for you there is, for the crowd, I imagine there's startups that are in here today, and I think that as you won a phase 1, I think some of the most valuable information that you can give is to walk people through how did you identify that first military adopter? Like who is it? How did you find them? How did you kind of press that pain point to them and walk them through? I think that a lot of that coaching can be leveraged with everybody here.
Sure. Yeah, well, that's where we were really fortunate to be able to connect with organizations like NSIN and AFWorks to make that first connection to someone who has this pain point. I think for a early stage startup who hasn't worked with DoD before, it can be really intimidating to figure out where that point of entry is. And so for us, we were fortunate to get connected with some folks at Beale Air Force Base through those programs, and they were describing the problem that they were facing with how do we equip pilots faster, more effectively? How do we decrease time to readiness? And we kind of listened to them describe this and said, oh, this sounds a lot like the problem we're solving in sports. Obviously, there's some nuances and there's some differences, but the problem seemed to resonate. And so from that, we then saw potential of the concept, which then we kind of started asking, like, how do we take this from just an idea to an actual prototype? And quickly, people referred us to AFWorks. And then we were fortunate to get that direct to phase 2, which proved out the concept. Yeah, and so I think a lot of it is having that first introduction and kind of working through the network from there.
So last question for you is, I think looking forward, you have so many potential opportunities. I think it's shaping, if there's an ask that you have, what is the very next step that you have? What's your ask, and how can we help? So that not only they can prepare for that next step, but so that anybody who might be listening might be able to help you.
Yeah, well, I'd say one big accomplishment over the past year is we've worked with Platform One to deploy our solution in their environment. So we got our certificate to field up to IL6. Mm-hmm. And so if there's any training needs that folks have, we are live and ready to go. So we'd love to connect. We haven't yet done anything with the Army. We've worked with Air Force, Navy, Space Force, Marine Corps, haven't yet broken into the Army. So I think in particular, anyone from the Army that has identified training need, we'd love to chat.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for coming today.
Appreciate it.
A couple things I want to share while you're still up here for
Okay.
a second is that for those of you who might be in the Army, or for those of you who might be out there that are part of the Army virtually, a couple things to think about is, as companies like Learn to Win come up, you start looking at what are the data implications of your teams not knowing what it means to be trained. You know, what are your teams missing? Whether it's in training environments, whether it's in shooting environments, or maybe even in training school. So I can immediately think of TRADOC is an immediate one. We talked about that the other day. We can go look at even places like basic training or infantry officers school. There's so many opportunities for people to go learn, and definitely excited to help you go win another contract, and maybe even we could develop a product for the acquisition community through Learn to Win. So
absolutely.
anyways, Andrew,
thanks so much, Jim. Appreciate it.
Yep.